Excellency Aung Suu Kyi, dear colleagues, dear guests, it's a great honor for me to welcome you on the Charles University in Patriotic Hall on the occasion of your state visit in our country. We are very honored that now you can participate on this lecture and be together with us, because in the 90s, in the last century, it was impossible because you are our Doctor Honoris Causa for a law, which was given to you in the 1997, and you cannot be together with us, but it's a gift to your husband, which is coming and celebrate you in the great aula of Carolina. We are waiting your talk about the changes from the and changing in your country, in Myanmar, during the last decades. We have a different history, but the same points. This year, for us, it's very important. We celebrate the 30 years after Velvet Revolution, which starting in November 1989, and our way to democracy have a different peripetties in the last century. We started at the beginning, as I mentioned, with President Masaryk after the first war. It's starting and flourishing the democratic country. After it's coming the protectorate, Czech and Moravia, the occupation by Nazi, and starting the short period of the democratic process after the Second World War. And in 1948, it's coming through the communist regime to the eastern part. And after this decades period, now we are celebrating the 30 years as a democratic country. Thank you very much for your coming, and now we are waiting your talk, Your Excellency.
Distinguished guests, faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 7 years since I was last in Prague. During this time, many changes have taken place in my country, and some of these changes may be reminiscent of what happened here 30 years ago in the immediate aftermath of the Velvet Revolution. Myanmar and other countries like us, grappling with the enormous task of nation building, observed your revolution with admiration and perhaps more than a little envy. Now, 30 years after, you stand as one of the safest, most peaceful countries in the world, more than ever admirable and enviable. And yet, some Czech friends claim that you are still in a process of transition. This gives us encouragement and renews our strength to continue meeting the challenges of our own transition. A Velvet Revolution, a radical change, a momentous event accomplished without abrasiveness or wounding, a revolution that managed to avoid bloodshed and to keep bad blood down to a minimum. Such a revolution is the dream of all of us who wish for change that is positive and peaceful, that will transform a vulnerable, strife-riven state into a strong, stable nation that embraces the aspirations of its peoples and fulfills their hopes. The Velvet Revolution of Czechoslovakia took place 1 year after the nationwide uprising in Burma. As you were then Czechoslovakia, we were Burma. The uprising was born at the beginning of 1988 and reached its climax in August of the same year. What had begun with hope ended with violence and bloodshed, leaving the inevitable ugliness of fear, anger, and mistrust. We might say that in 1988, Myanmar reached the point where Czechoslovakia stood in 1968, when the promises of the Prague Spring seemed to have withered in the bud. Our 1988 revolution was not of a velvet quality. But velvet revolutions do not just happen. It takes time and perseverance to gather together the necessary men and materials and to work these with painstakingly acquired skills to produce beauty and durability. The Velvet Revolution of Czechoslovakia was an invaluable product of the principal struggle of the late Mr. Václav Havel and the Civic Forum, and others of like mind who believed in the possibility and desirability of living in truth. Over many years, Mr. Havel and his comrades nurtured the seedlings of a movement for freedom and democracy that grew into a peaceful process of transition. The fruits of this transition we see before us today: a thriving and free republic that is a model for peace, stability, healthcare, education, market economy, and democratic governance. At this point, I would like to pay a heartfelt tribute to Mr. Václav Havel and other champions of the Czech people whose vision and courage created the modern, thriving Czech Republic. Their contributions were not limited to this country alone. They gave hope to many peoples all over the world and inspired them to remain strong, to keep alive their faith, and never to lose hope. Very few transitions are smooth sailing. Myanmar's transition process has been particularly convoluted and complex, a compound of major challenges stemming from a legacy of internal armed conflicts that began with independence in 1948, aggravated by more than 50 years of authoritarian rule that began in 1962 and even today continues to cast its shadow through an undemocratic constitution. The 1988 revolution left a tangled aftermath that was an augury of the intricate road to democratic reform that we would have to travel over the next 3 decades. Now we are into the 4th decade, and yet we have not reached our final goal. The uprising was put down violently, and the totalitarian military state law and order restoration councils established. This later became the State Peace and Development Council, when most of the opposition had been suppressed and law and order was deemed to have been sufficiently restored. A ray of hope remained as political parties were allowed legal registration and general elections were promised as a first step to democratic governance. More than 200 parties sprang up overnight, reflecting the thirst of the people to give voice to their political views. However, when the overwhelming desire of the public for an end to authoritarianism became evident, and the National League for Democracy emerged as a party that enjoyed the strong support of our people, political repression became the order of the day. Intimidations and arrests increased in frequency, and many began to doubt the sincerity of the junta. Some asserted that the only way to reform was through armed struggle and decided to join organizations that were engaged in armed conflict with the government. Throughout this turbulent period, even with a number of our top leaders under arrest, the National League for Democracy adhered firmly to its basic principles of nonviolence and national reconciliation. To cut a long story short enough to fit into the time allowed for this talk, the NLD won more than 80% of the seats in the elections of 1990, but this unequivocal mandate of the people was ignored by the regime, and we entered a phase of prolonged struggle, during the course of which almost all the parties that had registered in 1988 disappeared. A constitution that was less than perfect in democratic essentials was adopted through a questionable referendum in 2008, and the party fielded by the SBDC won a landslide victory in the general elections of 2010. The NLD boycotted the elections, but after successfully negotiating the removal of an unacceptable regulation, we contested the by-elections of 2012, winning 43 out of 45 seats. Subsequently, we contested the general elections in 2015 and won a majority large enough to form a government in spite of the provisions in the 2008 Constitution that aimed at preventing the emergence of a truly functional democratic system. Again, keeping the time constraint in mind, let me mention just a few of those provisions. Military representatives nominated by the Commander-in-Chief occupied 25% of the seats in the Union, as well as the regional and state legislatures. The Commander-in-Chief nominates the Ministers for Home, Defense, and Border Affairs. All matters pertaining to military activities are under the jurisdiction of the Commander-in-Chief. For key clauses of the Constitution, including those mentioned above, to be amended, more than 75% of the members of the Union legislature must vote in favor of amendment. Then this must be endorsed by at least 50% of registered voters in a public referendum. Not surprisingly, juridical experts have pronounced that the Myanmar Constitution is about the most rigid in the world today. As amending the Constitution has been one of the main planks of the NLD party platform since we contested the by-elections in 2012, we took up the matter in the Union legislature earlier this year. A joint parliamentary commission is now addressing the issue, and while there is the expected opposition within the legislature, we have been encouraged by the interest with which our people are following the proceedings. The Myanmar government is also engaged in a peace process to bring an end to the fraternal strife that has plagued our country throughout its years as an independent nation. In a multi-ethnic country like Myanmar, making unity out of diversity is a multifaceted challenge. 3 peace conferences have been held since our government took office in 2016, and we continue to negotiate constantly with nearly 20 armed ethnic organizations that we might all be able to join in the building of a democratic federal union. Wielding peace out of conflicts that go back for decades requires patience and commitment. Building mutual respect and understanding and promoting trust in the value of negotiation and compromise between forces that have long to look upon military contest as the only way of settling differences is slow and laborious. But our people want peace, and it is our duty to ensure that the will of the people prevails. Another legacy of the past for which the NLD government assumed responsibility when we took office at the end of March 2016 was the situation in northern Rakhine. This western strip of Myanmar is one of the least developed parts of our country, and a round of communal conflicts in 2012 drew the attention of the world to it. Focusing on the basic causes of the troubles, our government established the Central Committee for Rule of Law and Development in the Rakhine at the end of May 2016. We also requested the late Dr. Kofi Annan to head a commission to advise us on how best we might address the issues that were undermining harmony and peace in the region. In October 2016, the attacks of AFSA terrorists on several police outposts and subsequent military retaliations unleashed a series of events that turned Rakhine into almost the only part of Myanmar that seemed to hold interest for the international community. The issues I have touched on above, political democratization, peace negotiations, Rakhine, are the parts of our transition that capture world attention and make the headlines. Few seem to be interested in what it was that the main players, our people, wanted from the transition, what their hopes were, as they waited stoically for more than half a century to express the longing of their hearts. During the 30 years since the founding of the NLD, whenever I have had a chance to go out to meet our people in different parts of the country, I ask them what it is that they hope for, what they dream of for themselves and for their children. Throughout all this time, right up to about a month ago when I visited a town in central Myanmar, I have received the same answers. The first requirement was water. Second, all-weather roads. Third, electricity. Fourth, better education facilities. Fifth, better health care. North, south, east, and west, not only were the needs the same, the sequence of their desires was exactly the same. How basic How modest are their dreams? Too simple to attract the interest of the world, but of paramount importance to us, to them. So when we assess how far our transition has come over the past 3 years, we see that access to both potable water and water for agriculture needs has increased significantly. Nearly 100,000 kilometers of highways have been upgraded, almost 1,000 kilometers of rural roads built, and 94 bridges constructed. Our electrification ratio will rise to 50% by the end of this year, from 34% in 2016. With regard to education, there is so much I would like to discuss that I hope you will ask questions about it today, particularly about our school children. In the health sector, we have been concentrating on public health with the aim of reducing the need for tertiary health care as much as possible. We have made considerable progress, and I think our Ministry of Health and Sports would wish me to mention that the Global Fund termed Myanmar a model country in the campaign against the 3 diseases, HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. The Myanmar Health Promotion Team was also awarded the Dr. Lee Jong-wook Memorial Prize for Public Health 2019 in recognition of the community health clinics and their contribution to public health in hard-to-reach areas. Perhaps for developed countries, for a country like the Czech Republic, these are matters of small import. But for us, for our people, it could mean the difference between life and death. Myanmar and the Czech Republic, though geographically far apart, enjoy excellent relations as we share a common history of democratic transition. We believe that the Central European countries, which have themselves gone through their own democratic transitions, have a sympathetic understanding of the challenges we are facing. We are aware that many obstacles will have to be overcome, of the need for continued endeavor, and we look to our friends for their encouragement and support that will speed us on our way to the resolution of our problems. So I have approached transition from 2 points of view, from the point of view of our people in Myanmar and what they hope from it, and from the point of view of the rest of the world who are interested only in particular issues and not in the whole picture. We have to address the particular issues that attract the attention of the international community because we are a member of that community and we take our responsibilities as a member of the international community very seriously. But at the same time, we cannot forget that we have to maintain a balance between what is needed within the country and what is asked for without. We try to strike the best, the healthiest balance. It is not always easy. And particularly as very few people know about the problems of our country in depth. These days, everything is placed very quickly in short, sharp sentences before the whole world. And problems are supposed to be resolved overnight. This is the age of instant gratification. But we who have been working on democratic transition for 30 years and not yet completed our task, we know that this is not how things work. Instant gratification is something that may happen in a roadside cafe, but not in a democratic transition. We have always looked to countries like Czechoslovakia to learn from you how you have overcome your troubles, how you have managed to meet your challenges. Of course, your challenges are very different from ours. Even at the time of the Velvet Revolution in 1989, the Czechoslovakia, as it was then, could not have been said to be an undeveloped country. Industrialization came to the Czech lands very early on, long before we were even an independent nation. And the education system in this country has been continued throughout the years of communism, throughout the years of the war education has been upheld. I say this particularly because this is an educational institution. And our great weakness over the past decades of authoritarian rule has been the collapse of our education system. We find in our country that the best educated people are all above 65. That reflects on the changes that came about after authoritarian rule was instituted in our country. The education system that made Burma, as it was then, the most progressive country in Southeast Asia, was maintained for roughly for about a decade after the military junta took over. But then later this tailed off, and we were left with a couple of generations of people who had had no access to the strength that education gives a people. We are trying to remedy it. As I said earlier, I'm particularly interested in the educational reforms that we have been able to institute in my country, because our children, our students, are our hope for the future. And I'm very optimistic about them. But I think it is for you to ask me what you want to know about our education system and about the other matters that I have mentioned, because I know that some are more interesting than others to any particular audience. So I understand that part of this meeting is going to be questions and answers. So I invite your questions now, that I may be able to answer them as best as I possibly can.
Your Excellencies, thank you very much for your interesting talk, showing us that the countries which are quite far have a very similar stories for the way to the democracy and the ways and protect the democracy. It is a story for whole life and whole centuries. As you mentioned, the education, we are the very old education institution. We have now only the 4 students from Myanmar, 3 on the School of Medicine and 1 the School of the Faculty of Social Sciences, but we are able to increase the cooperation with your country, your universities, and also we should help with our specialists on education or healthcare system or other areas from nature sciences to promote the cooperation between our countries and our nations and societies. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, guests, we have now time for questions, comments to Your Excellency. Have the first question or comments? Maybe I have first one for the beginning. How your idea to increase the basic education system in whole Myanmar? Have you some plan to have develop all basic education up to 15 years age and the secondary level of education to whole country up to 25 or 2030? Or
well, at the moment we have free elementary education for all, yeah. But we have to raise the standard of our education. It is not enough just simply to make education available. It has to be good education. Yeah. And for me, I think elementary education is most important. Unless we start the children off right, unless they start school feeling that education is something they can enjoy, I think it will be very difficult for us to encourage them to stay on in school. The dropout rate, of course, is high, partly because, mainly I suppose, not partly, mainly because there are many parents who cannot afford to keep their children on at school. But we hope that this will be remedied, and certainly we have to change the education system and the exam system, which to date is based simply on rote learning. We do not think that rote learning induces children to love education. And having changed the system over the past 2 or 3 years, we've noticed a considerable difference in the attitude of our children towards school. Whenever I visit small towns in the rural areas, I try to go to schools to find out how the children are. And what is most encouraging is that they're actually enjoying school, because now they learn in a way that they can enjoy. It's not just, they are not just forced to regurgitate whatever it is that the teacher spouts to them. So we are making education not just as widely available as possible, but also as widely enjoyable as possible.
I think it's very important to attract the students for the educational process, and also the quality of education. It's very, very important to growing Professor Vildova.
Very much thank you for introducing the Burma or Myanmar Republic, and thank you for answering the question about the basic education or compulsory school education. And what I appreciate very much that you recognize the difference between to have all children in the education, but to have them in innovative education, enjoyable education, which is not for children just to be at school, but really enjoy the school. So thank you for that. It is very innovative. And my question is about teacher education. Where do you prepare your teachers? I can't say train the teachers, I mean educate teachers as a facilitators of children at school.
Well, we are teaching them to enjoy learning. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I visited a refresher course for teachers, 800 teachers all together in one place, following a 24-day course, retraining them, a refresher course as we call it. And this was very encouraging because the teachers were obviously enjoying the course very much. For the first time in their lives, they were having art lessons and music lessons, because in their day, this is not part of the school curriculum. But now we're introducing art and music and sports as part of the school curriculum. We find that, I was discussing this earlier at lunch, we find that our boys are not doing very well at school. I'm told that this is not a problem in the Czech Republic, but it is certainly a problem. Is it a problem? Well, our boys are not doing well at school, and the dropout rate of boys is so much higher than the dropout rate of girls.
It's the same situation here.
So we have been trying to get to the base of the matter. What is it? Why is it that the boys are not doing well? And we have discovered that boys do better, that innately they are better at art and music. So we are trying to introduce art and music, not just to make our, to provide our children with a better rounded education, but also to give our boys a chance of showing their talents and making them feel confident enough to want to continue with school. And the teachers were enjoying the whole course immensely. And that I found very encouraging. If the teachers learn to enjoy learning, then they will be able to teach the children in such a way that the children also will enjoy learning.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very inspirative, and we are on the same way. And it's very inspirative for us that in your country are doing the similar way to innovate the teacher education process. So thank you for that.
We're also trying to change the exam system to give the boys a better chance. I'm not giving them better marks or giving them easier questions, but apparently some research in Thailand has revealed that boys, if you give boys longer time to answer questions, they do as well as the girls, but they do need a longer time. I suppose they're not as quick as girls. So we're trying everything possible to ensure that there's gender equality.
Yeah.
Well, just very briefly, I can comment that the situation here, what we know from our research center, the boys are a little bit, I doesn't want to be unpolite. They are a little bit slowly, but only during the compulsory school education. But on the secondary school, they are usually much better than the girls, because if they find a topic which is interesting for them and they are very highly motivated for that, that's the reason they are better, because if they are motivated, they do that. So that's maybe the question of that.
Well, we'll have to study the Czech education system, because our problem is that so many boys drop out after secondary school. They don't go on to high school. And then, of course, more drop out after high school instead of going on to university.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are a little bit slower, but we still survive as a man. But for that's in our countries, there is a discussion about the gender equity in some position on the universities and industry. And for your information, now it's a proportion rate on the universities. 65% are women on university as a students, and 35% it's a man. But it depends. We have the two outliners. One outliner, it is a School of Mathematics and Physics. There is only 25% of women. And the other outliner is a School of Pharmacy. There is 85% of women. Yeah, but majority around the 65%. That's a ratio, and it's, as mentioned Professor Vildova, it depends on the topic. The boys like the one topic and follow it on the high quality, and the women's are maybe more renaissance. And next question or comments?
But it's the same about 60-40 in our country as well.
Yeah, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to know your government, which areas of international cooperation are your government interested in, and what kind of international cooperation you are receiving at this stage? Thank you.
Well, as I said earlier, two of our priorities are education and health. And of course, there is the business sector. For the sake of development, we do need to develop our business ties and our trade ties. But with a lot of countries, what we want to set up are education and health exchanges, because we want to improve the education of our people and the health of our people. And some of the countries have been working very closely with us in this. Is that the sort of cooperation you meant, or? Yes.
To develop, for example, a particular...
And agriculture. Because Myanmar is still a basically agriculture country. About 70% of our people earn their living in the agriculture sector. We have ambitions to make Myanmar what we call agri-based industrialized nation, because my theory is that whatever happens, people will still need to eat. So food will always be a necessity. And ultimately, food comes from the ground. So I think if we were to develop our agricultural sector and modernize it so we become an agri-based industrialized nation, such as, for example, New Zealand, it would not only help us to develop what the resources we already have, it will also help us to keep our country green and beautiful.
I'm the ambassador of Argentina, so I think that we could help a lot in that area.
Oh, we'd be very, very grateful. I think our ambassador would be very happy to speak to you about this, to discuss this with you in further detail. Oh, well, I was actually thinking about our ambassador to the Czech Republic, but the Czech ambassador to Myanmar is waving his hand, so I think he wants to be, he will be involved as well. He has been a very good friend to Myanmar and knows a lot about our needs and our aspirations. Our medical school is good, I have to say.
Yeah. Other question or comments? Professor Shkra.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to Charles University. We are very satisfied that there is enormous development in cooperation with South Asia universities, high schools, and so on. And there are different possibilities, either that the students are coming to Charles University studying here, or we have some interrelationships with universities. Do you see any new developments in this area. I think that there will be awaited some new developments with your universities or your students coming here to different type of studies, not only in medicine, but also in humanities.
And we'd be very appreciative. I like to say, and I repeat that quite often enough, that in the 1950s, when we first started building up our relations with Czechoslovakia as it was then, I think we were the Southeast Asian nation closest to your country. Of course, the situation has changed a bit, but we would like to re-establish and strengthen old ties.
Yeah, other question or comments? It's maybe the last question, as I mentioned about the promoting the better cooperation, and we are able as university and other colleagues from education and healthcare system, because we are very closely related to university hospital, to able and increasing the cooperation with your country and your institution. Okay, the last, the students.
Hello, it's very honored to meet you. And let me introduce myself first. I am a student from Charles University, and I come from Yangon, and I currently study now in the Faculty of Medicine in Czech Republic. My question is that how can students like us contribute to strengthening the relationship between Czech Republic and Burma in the future?
I think, first of all, you'd better enjoy yourself while you're here. That is the best way to establish good people-to-people relations. I think by making friends. That is how we contribute to good relations between countries, by making friends at the personal level. And then, of course, there will come a time when you will be making friends at the professional level. But while you're here as a student, I think you should just concentrate on making friends and learning as much as you can, that you may be able to use what you have learned in the interests of our country when you come back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If it's no question, Your Excellency, once again, I would like to thank you for your talk and discussion, which mentions that we are open and prepared to improving and make more strengthened cooperation between our country and Myanmar and our educational, healthcare and other institutions. And I believe that it will be the fruitful for making the friendship and also make a better knowledge between us. Now it will be the new embassies in our countries, which also will be promoting, and the Charles University is very, very open and prepared to improve the cooperation between our countries. Thank you once again.
Thank you, and I just want to thank you all.